Part 1. The Tinder Encounter with Tracy. Narrator. It was the dead of winter, last December. I was newly single, the echoes of a 2-year relationship still haunting my thoughts. I found myself back in the world of swiping, back on Tinder, back to the superficial dance of online dating. It felt different this time. I was in my late 20s, an accountant with a corner townhome, good money but a life that felt unbearably boring. The privacy and quiet I craved after my ex moved out quickly lost its charm. I was lonely, desperate for any kind of human connection. Narrator. That's when I matched with her Tracy. She seemed intriguing. We exchanged Snapchat information, but the conversation fizzled out. She was just watching my stories, never really engaging. It was frustrating, but I was used to it. College was filled with such fleeting interactions, but now it felt different, more desperate. Narrator. Then, out of nowhere, she commented on my Christmas story. She suggested we do something festive together. My heart skipped a beat. I suggested ice skating, visiting the village, but she had a different idea, decorating my Christmas tree. Narrator. I agreed, despite the nagging feeling in my gut. I had a fake tree, but it was in the attic. I told her it was a 2-person job, hoping she'd offer to come over. She did. I found myself rushing to the liquor store, buying wine, vacuuming, sweeping, anything to make the place presentable. Narrator. She arrived, and I was shocked. She was taller than me, at least 6'1", and she smelled strange. Her perfume was overpowering, but beneath it, there was a hint of something off. Body odor, perhaps. I tried to ignore it. Narrator. We sat on the couch, and I poured the wine. Have you ever met someone in person who was nothing like you imagined? That was Tracy. Something felt off. She lacked certain social cues, like spilling wine on my couch. I tried to brush it off, but the unease was growing. Narrator. I suggested we get the tree from the attic. As I handed her the pieces, I felt a growing sense of dread. When I returned, she was gone. I searched the house, but she had vanished. I messaged her on Snapchat, but she never opened it. Narrator. That's when I noticed the missing items: every last bottle of pills, my vitamins, my Adderall, even the oxy I never finished after surgery. A bottle of vodka was also missing from my mini fridge. I called the police, but they found no trace of her. Narrator. I knew something was wrong from the moment I met her. She was older than she claimed, possibly homeless, with a serious drug addiction. She had used me, and now she was gone. I never decorated the tree that year. The Airbnb incident. Narrator. It was December 2022, and my girlfriend Charlotte and I were driving to the Pocono Mountains. We had rented a cozy Airbnb, filled with Christmas decorations, promising a festive getaway. But as we turned onto the gravel road, a sense of unease settled over me. Narrator. The house was surrounded by woods, with a big deck and a hot tub. It looked perfect, but the darkness of the forest was unnerving. We brought in our groceries and settled in, the Christmas tree lights casting a warm glow. Narrator. We ate dinner on the couch, watching the Polar Express, feeling the warmth of the holiday spirit. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Narrator. We decided to relax in the hot tub, the snow falling gently around us. But then the bubbles stopped, and the silence was deafening. We heard footsteps on the property, and my heart raced. Narrator. Charlotte and I exchanged a worried glance. I suggested calling out, but she shook her head. The footsteps faded, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Narrator. We went to take a shower, but the water turned ice cold after a few minutes. We screamed and jumped out, our hearts pounding. I messaged the host, Mike, who said he'd send someone to fix the hot water heater. Narrator. In the middle of the night, we were awakened by loud, aggressive bangs on the door. Charlotte was terrified, and I was too afraid to move. We sat in silence, whispering to each other, until the banging stopped. Narrator. The next morning, I went outside to wipe the snow off my Jeep. That's when I noticed the footprints, fresh footprints, looping around the house. My blood ran cold. Narrator. Then Tom appeared, claiming to be the host's brother, but something about him seemed off. I mentioned the hot water heater and the knocks at the door, and his behavior was strange. I messaged Mike, who said he had no brother named Tom. Narrator. Realization hit me like a ton of bricks. We packed our bags and left as quickly as we could. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something truly sinister. Narrator. Later, Mike messaged me, apologizing and confirming that he had no knowledge of anyone matching Tom's description. The man had been watching us the entire time, and who knows what his intentions were. We were lucky to leave when we did. Narrator. Both incidents taught me the importance of trusting my instincts. In the Tinder encounter, I sensed something was off with Tracy, and in the Airbnb incident, the strange occurrences and Tom's behavior confirmed my suspicions. It's crucial to be cautious when meeting new people, especially in unfamiliar settings, and to always have a plan for emergencies. Narrator. In the end, it's the unknown that scares us the most, but it's also the unknown that keeps us on our toes, reminding us to stay vigilant and never let our guard down. Winter Encounters. A collection of unsettling holiday tales. Narrator. The holidays are supposed to bring warmth and joy, but sometimes they leave shadows that linger far longer than twinkling lights. Over the past few years, I've learned that strange things happen when the snow falls, and sometimes the unknown follows you home. The Tinder encounter with Tracy. It was last December, the dead of winter. I was newly single, still haunted by echoes of a 2-year relationship. Back on Tinder, back to swiping, back to the shallow pool of online dating. But this time felt different. I was in my late 20s, an accountant with a corner townhome, good money, but a life that felt suffocatingly boring. The privacy and quiet I craved after my ex moved out had quickly turned into loneliness. I wanted connection, any connection. That's when I matched with her, Tracy. She seemed interesting, if not a little distant. We exchanged Snapchats, but the conversations were surface level, almost non-existent. She watched my stories but rarely engaged. Frustrating, but I was used to that. It felt like college all over again, but this time I was more desperate. Out of nowhere, she replied to my Christmas story. She suggested we do something festive together. My heart jumped. I threw out a few ideas: skating, the village, but she proposed something else, decorating my Christmas tree. I agreed, even though something tugged at my gut. I had a fake tree in the attic and joked that it was a 2-person job. She offered to come over. I rushed to the liquor store, grabbed wine, vacuumed, swept. I needed the place to feel warm, inviting. She arrived, and I was stunned. Taller than me, at least 6'1", and there was a strange scent about her. Her perfume was overwhelming, masking something else: body odor. I brushed it off. We sat on the couch, sipping wine. You ever meet someone who's nothing like you imagined? That was Tracy. She lacked something. She spilled wine on my couch, barely acknowledging it. I felt uneasy. I suggested we get the tree. As I handed her the pieces from the attic, the dread grew. When I returned with the final piece, she was gone. I checked every room, no sign of her. I messaged her on Snapchat, left on delivered. Then I noticed it. My pills were gone: Adderall, Oxy from a past surgery, vitamins, even the vodka from the mini fridge. I called the police. They found nothing. Tracy wasn't who she claimed to be. Older, possibly homeless, definitely an addict. I should have known. I never decorated the tree that year. The Airbnb incident, December 2022. My girlfriend Charlotte and I were heading to the Pocono Mountains for a holiday escape. A cozy Airbnb decked out in Christmas lights. Perfect. But as we turned onto the gravel road, unease crept in. The cabin sat nestled against thick woods, snow blanketing the deck and hot tub. Charming in daylight, ominous by night. We unpacked, set groceries down, and let the Christmas lights inside warm the space. We ate on the couch, watching the Polar Express. It felt like Christmas, but as the hours passed, small things nagged at me. Later, we slipped into the hot tub. Snow fell gently around us, but then the bubbles stopped. In the silence, footsteps crunched nearby. Charlotte looked at me, eyes wide. I thought about calling out, but something in me resisted. The footsteps faded, but I knew we weren't alone. Inside, we showered, but the water turned ice cold. We jumped out, cursing. I messaged the host. He said someone would fix it in the morning. That night, banging echoed through the house. Charlotte clung to me, trembling. We didn't move. We just listened until it stopped. Morning. I stepped outside to clear the snow off my Jeep. That's when I saw them footprints. Fresh, circling the cabin. A man approached from the woods. Tom, he introduced himself, claiming to be the host's brother. Something about him felt wrong. I mentioned the heater and the knocks. His response was strange, detached. I messaged the host. His reply came instantly. I don't have a brother. I didn't ask questions. Charlotte and I packed up, left within minutes. As we drove away, I watched the woods, half expecting Tom to appear again. Later, the host apologized, horrified by what had happened. We never found out who Tom was, but I know this someone was watching us, and they were closer than we thought. The Hotel Stranger, July 2023. Charlotte and I stayed at a boutique hotel in New Orleans. Historic, quaint, a little too quiet. One night, I stepped into the hallway to get ice. As I returned, I saw a man standing by our door. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Locked out? He asked casually. I nodded, pretending not to notice how he was subtly trying to peer inside our room. Charlotte opened the door, and his eyes lingered on her. I pushed the door closed behind me, locking it twice. Later that night, we heard scratching at the door. The peephole was blacked out. We didn't sleep until dawn. The Christmas Drive, Christmas Eve, 2023. Driving to Charlotte's parents' house, snow falling lightly. As we drove through a rural stretch, headlights appeared behind us, tailgating aggressively. I switched lanes, but the car followed, persistent. Finally, I slowed near a gas station. The car sped up, passing us. The driver rolled down his window and stared. His face was eerily familiar. It was Tom, or someone who looked exactly like him. I never mentioned it to Charlotte, but every holiday season, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching, waiting. The forgotten gift. The forgotten gift. It was December 2019, and the holiday bustle had reached its peak. I wandered into an old antique shop I'd never noticed before, tucked away on a dimly lit side street. The shop smelled of old wood and mothballs, with shelves crammed with forgotten relics. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until my eyes landed on a porcelain music box. It was delicate, painted with a snowy winter scene. Inside, tiny skaters circled a mirrored pond when the box was wound. It was perfect for my sister, who adored anything vintage. The shopkeeper appeared out of nowhere, startling me. He was pale, with deep-set eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he spoke. "That's quite the find," he said, his voice a whisper. "But you should know it's not for everyone." His words unsettled me, but I laughed it off. "How much?" $20, he said. "But no returns. And one more thing, never let the box wind itself down." I thought it was just a gimmick to sell the piece and handed him the cash. As he wrapped it in tissue paper, I noticed something odd about his reflection in the mirror behind the counter. It seemed delayed, as if he moved, and his reflection took a moment to follow. I left quickly, brushing off the strange encounter. On Christmas morning, my sister Mia was thrilled. She wound the music box, and the tiny skaters began to glide across the mirrored surface. A sweet, haunting melody filled the room. For a moment, I thought I saw one of the figurines glance up at me, but I shook the thought away. That night, Mia called me. "The music box is weird," she said hesitantly. "Weird how?" "It started playing on its own, and I could swear one of the skaters moved when I wasn't looking. Like, really moved." I laughed. "You've had too much eggnog." But she wasn't laughing. "Can you come over tomorrow?" The next day, I drove to Mia's house. Snow was falling lightly, blanketing the street in eerie silence. When I arrived, she was waiting for me on the porch, her face pale. "It's gone," she said before I even got inside. "What do you mean, gone?" "I left it on the mantel last night. When I woke up, it wasn't there." We searched the house. Nothing. But near the fireplace, there was something that made my stomach drop. Small footprints in the ash, leading out to the yard. "They're tiny," Mia whispered, "like a child's." We followed the prints outside, where they vanished into the snow. That night, Mia stayed at my place, too scared to sleep alone. The following week, strange things started happening. Mia began hearing the music box's melody faintly in the middle of the night, even though it was gone. Once, she woke to find her Christmas tree tipped over, ornaments shattered, and a single tiny figuria skater from the box standing in the middle of her living room. Desperate, we returned to the antique shop. But when we arrived, it wasn't there. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and scattered with debris. "What the hell?" I muttered. We asked around, but no one remembered the shop. By New Year's Eve, Mia was a wreck. She called me at 3 a.m., sobbing. "They're in the house," she cried. I raced to her place, but when I arrived, it was empty. The front door was ajar, the house freezing cold. I found her phone on the floor and the music box on the mantel, winding itself. The skaters were no longer inside. Instead, their tiny footprints led up the stairs. I followed them, heart pounding, to Mia's bedroom. The door was ajar, and the music grew louder. As I stepped inside, I saw them, small figures, no taller than a foot, gathered around Mia's bed. Their porcelain faces turned toward me in unison, their painted smiles twisting into something more sinister. Mia was gone. The police never found her. The official report said she disappeared under unusual circumstances. The music box was taken as evidence, but it vanished from the precinct a week later. To this day, I sometimes hear that melody, soft, haunting, and impossible to ignore. I know they're still out there, waiting, watching. The snowman on Sycamore Street. It was Christmas Eve, and I was driving through my childhood neighborhood to visit my parents. Snow blanketed the streets, and festive lights twinkled in every yard. But as I turned onto Sycamore Street, something felt off. It wasn't the lights, nor the snow. It was the snowmen. Every house had one in the front yard, eerily identical, tall, perfectly rounded, with black button eyes and a crooked carrot nose. The same striped scarf adorned each neck, fluttering slightly in the wind. At first, I thought it was some neighborhood project or quirky tradition, but as I drove slowly past, I felt their button eyes following me. I shook my head, laughing at my imagination, and continued to my parents' house. As I turned onto their street, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Don't look back." I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. Before I could process the message, my car shut off. The headlights dimmed, and the world outside plunged into shadow. Then, from the rearview mirror, I saw them. Snowmen. At least a dozen, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road behind me. Their scarves whipped violently, though the air was still. I jumped out of the car, sprinting the rest of the way to my parents' house. I banged on the door until my dad opened it, his face creased with confusion. "There's something outside," I shouted. He glanced over my shoulder. "There's nothing there," he said. When I turned, the street was empty. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I stared out the window, watching the snow fall. Around midnight, I saw it. A single snowman standing in the middle of the yard. It hadn't been there before. By morning, it was gone. But its presence lingered. The holiday party. December 2021. My company's annual holiday party was held at an old mansion rented out for the occasion. It was extravagant, with towering Christmas trees, roaring fireplaces, and twinkling chandeliers. The night started as expected: awkward small talk, mediocre drinks, and too many tacky Christmas sweaters. But as the hours passed, I started to notice something strange about the waitstaff. They were too quiet, moving through the crowd without a sound. Their eyes never seemed to blink. At one point, I saw a waiter standing completely still in the corner, staring at a guest who hadn't noticed. His head tilted slightly, and a smile curled across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to too much spiked eggnog. But then, I noticed something else. No one ever saw the waitstaff leave the kitchen. They simply appeared. Around midnight, the power flickered. The room plunged into darkness for a moment before the backup generators kicked in. When the lights returned, the waitstaff was gone. All of them. I looked around, confused. The kitchen was empty, the serving trays abandoned. A strange hush fell over the room, and then the doors slammed shut. We were trapped. Someone tried calling 911, but there was no signal. Another guest suggested we break a window, but when they tried, the glass wouldn't budge. That's when we heard Ita's soft tapping, like knuckles against wood. It came from every door in the room, rhythmic and deliberate. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Then, it stopped. A single voice spoke from the other side of the door, calm and chilling. Time to serve the guests. The doors burst open, and they were there, the waitstaff. Their faces had changed, their features sharp and inhuman. Only a handful of us made it out that night. The Christmas ornament. It was a gift from my aunt, sent in a small, unmarked box. A beautiful glass ornament with intricate red and gold designs. "Put it on the tree," her note said. I hesitated. Aunt Sylvia had always been eccentric, but the ornament was stunning, and my tree could use a little extra flair. That night, as I sat on the couch, admiring the glow of the Christmas lights, I noticed the ornament swaying slightly. There was no draft, no breeze. I approached it slowly, heart pounding. Up close, I saw something I hadn't noticed before etched into the glass. Almost imperceptibly, was an eye. I stared at it, and it seemed to stare back. The next morning, I woke to find every other ornament on the tree shattered. The floor was littered with shards, but the glass eye hung untouched, glinting in the sunlight. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Lights flickered, shadows moved where they shouldn't, and at night, I heard whispering, soft and insidious, coming from the tree. By Christmas Eve, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the ornament, intending to throw it out, but as I held it, the whispers grew louder, turning into screams. My hand began to burn, and I dropped it. The ornament didn't shatter. Instead, it rolled across the floor and stopped, the eye now fixed on me. I left the house that night and never went back.